All right, good morning, everyone. It's 9:01 a.m., so we'll get started. This week we're reading Parshas Noach, of course. Parshas Noach can be found on page 39 in the Steinsaltz Chumash and page 30 in the Art Scroll. So again, we are on page 39 in the Steinsaltz Chumash and page 30 in the Art Scroll Chumash. One thing that I noticed about the Parsha, about the stories of Parshas Noach this year, is how much gets left unsaid, how much is not specified, and we'll see what that means more in depth in a moment. But just right off the bat, Eila toldos Noach ish tzaddik. Noach is a righteous person. Tamim haya b'dorosav. He was perfect. He was pure. Es Elokim hisalech Noach, right? He walked with God. What does that mean to be a tzaddik? Putting aside the whole discussion of the Medrash, the yesh dorshin l'shvach, yesh dorshin l'genai. Some understand, Noach being described as a tzaddik in his generation. Some think that's a praise. Some claim that that's not a praise. Putting that discussion aside, what does it mean to be a tzaddik? The Torah has not been given. The commandments that Hashem has given so far have been restricted to the Eitz Hadas, and clearly Noach is not someone who appears to live in proximity to the Eitz Hadas. And so, what is it that defines him as a tzaddik? And there are further questions like this to be asked on the Parsha, which I will get to in a moment. But I'd like to hold off on that for a second, because there's a very interesting contrast set up in the language of last week's Parsha, Parshas Bereshis, which helps us to frame and approach this week's Parsha, Parshas Noach. And what I mean by that is as follows: when Hashem decides to destroy the world, when Hashem decides to bring the Mabul, to bring the flood, the language that's used by the Torah seems to be addressing very specifically language that was used to create the world. And it's very interesting to see how that develops. So if we turn back in our Chumash to Perek Aleph, to the beginning of Parshas Bereshis, and look at the language that was used in the creation of humanity, it'll be interesting to see some of that language. So if you're using a Steinsaltz Chumash, it is on page 13, and in the Art Scroll, it is on page 8. So if we look at Perek Aleph, Pasuk Chavav, so it says, V'yomer Elokim na'aseh adam b'tzalmenu kidmusenu, right? Na'aseh, let us make man in our image and in our form, and v'yirdu b'gaseyam v'avashamayim v'abema, and he will have mastery over the rest of nature. But the verb, the specific verb for creation, there's a few different verbs for creation. There's asa, to make. There's bara, create. There's yotzar, which is also yotzer, which also means create in a different way. So here the word that's being used is naaseh, right? Let us make. The word asa. Now, if we hold the place and we look at Perek Vav, so we'll see, which is the end of Parshas Bereshis, which sets the stage for Parshas Noach. So we'll see something very interesting in the language, because if you turn to Perek Vav, Pasuk Vav and Zion, Perek Vav, Pasuk Vav and Zion, you hold the place where we are, and in the Steinsaltz it's page 37, and in the Art Scroll it is page 26. Yeah, Vav and Zion. So it says, Vayinachem Hashem ki asa es adam ba'aretz, vayisatzev el libo. Right, Hashem regrets ki asa es ha'adam. right? So it's the same verb as naaseh adam b'tzalmenu, naaseh, right? Hashem regrets that that he created man. Again, using that very same verb, and continuing to read here. V'yomer Hashem emche es adam asher barasi me'al pnei ha'adama me'adam ad be'ema ad remes arof hashamayim ki nichamti ki asisim. Again, that word asa, right? And by the way, you'll notice that I skipped over the word barasi. Hashem does use the word barasi, but these two usages of asa and asisim seem to be drawing our attention specifically to the beginning of the creation story. So that with this language, we're basically bookending this stage of creation and saying, this is how this stage of creation began, and this is how it's ending, and this is why it's ending. Hashem regrets that he creates man, and by using the same word, it draws our attention to that. But another thing that's interesting is if you hold the place in Perek Vav and turn back to Perek Aleph, so it says further in Pasuk Chav Zayin, right? Vayivra Elokim es Adam b'tzalmo Elokim bara oso. Zechar nakiva bara osam. So 3 times in that next pasuk, instead of using the word asa, it uses the word bara, which also is repeated here in Perek Vav, as I mentioned, right? Emche es hadam asher barasi, right? Using the word bara. So that combination of the word asa and bara, which was used last time, which was used in Perek Aleph, is now used in Perek Vav to create this contrast. And one other thing which I think is really fascinating, another contrast, is if you go back to Perek Aleph and you look at Pasuk Lamed Aleph, the last Pasuk of Perek Aleph. So it says, Vayar Elokim es kol asher asa v'hinei tov ma'od. Hashem took a step back and observed all that he had created, and behold, it was very good. Tov ma'od, right? We talked about the word tov last time, and the number of times that the word tov is used, and this one is the climactic moment, the ultimate expression, because it's not just tov, but it's tov ma'od. And what's interesting is that the world goes from what Hashem calls tov ma'od to turn back to Perek Vav again, Pasuk Hey this time, right? 2 psukim before, Vayar Hashem ki rabba ra'as ha'adam ba'aretz v'chol yetzer machshavos libo rak ra kol hayom. Right? Hashem sees that ra'as ha'adam, right? Ra'as ha'adam, the wickedness of man was great in the earth. V'chol yetzer machshavos libo, and every inclination of the thoughts of his heart is rak kol hayom, is only evil all the time. That's a very absolute expression. Rak, nothing but evil, nothing but bad. Which to me is clearly a contrast to tov ma'od, right? When Hashem created the world, he created the world that was tov ma'od, and now this world, at the end of this section of the story of creation, or the story of the beginnings of the world, goes from tov ma'od to rak ra, to nothing but ra, nothing but wickedness, which again I think is another way in which the Torah, using language, is drawing our attention to a contrast between creation, how it started, and how it's ending. It started in a way in which Hashem uses the verbs asa and bara, and those verbs are used again to show the contrast of where things have descended to, and the same thing with tov ma'od and rak ra. And of course, the question is, what defines ra? What defines evil? The Torah doesn't offer us an explicit explanation. There is some explanation, right? In our Parsha, we'll see that he uses the word chamas to describe what was going on, but the Torah is more concerned with defining or describing the nature of people than their actual actions, which I think is very interesting, is something I want to talk about this morning, why the Torah takes that approach. The Torah places a lot less emphasis on what is actually being done and puts the focus on the import or the significance of the actions that are being done. And this last linguistic contrast that I mentioned, the fact that we went from Tov Ma'od to Rak Ra, what's so interesting to me, and I'm sure I'm not the first one to notice this, and it's something else I'd like to talk about today, is the fact that if you put the words together, Tov Vara, it should remind you of something. The Eitz Hadas, right? The Eitz Hadas, Tov Vara. So it's interesting to me that Hashem goes from, creating a world which is Tov Ma'od. Hashem puts Adam and Chav in Gan Eden, where there is the tree of the Eitz Hadas, Tov Vara, and then we get to Rak Ra Kol Hayom, and so perhaps there's something that the Eitz Hadas represents when it comes to the concept of Tov and Ra, and the fact that Adam and Chava ate from that tree, which marks the transition from how we got to the beginning, how we went from the beginning where everything was Tov Ma'od to here, which is Rak Ra. We'll get back to this a little bit later, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that linguistic contrast of Tov Ma'od to Rak Ra is captured by the Eitz Hadas. But now that we see this contrast in last week's Parsha, it seems that the Torah is presenting us with a bookended unit of time, and we're now entering a new stage of time, the stage of Noach and the Mabul. And again, what sticks out to me this year in looking at Parshas Noach is the fact that the Torah places far more emphasis on the significance of people's actions as opposed to the actions themselves. There are many things that are assumed and taken for granted, namely that Noach is a tzaddik for some reason. It doesn't tell us what makes him a tzaddik. It's painted in very general terms. Noach is a tzaddik because he walks with Hashem. If you look at the end of Perek Vav, if you look at the end of Parshas Bereshis, which is Perek Vav, which we were holding on to, Pasuk Hey, Vayar Hashem ki rabah rabas ha'adam ba'aretz, right? So then it goes into Noach, Pasuk Ches, v'Noach matzah chen b'nei Hashem. Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem, right? Noach conducted himself in a way that was pleasing to Hashem. But again, the Torah doesn't tell us what was so pleasing about Noach's behavior. The Torah is not concerned with the technical details. Chazal fill that in for us, but it's absent in the text. So turning to Parshas Noach, the beginning of Parshas Noach, which again is page 39 in the Steinsaltz, page 30 in the Art Scroll. So again, Eila Toras Noach ish tzadik, tamim haya b'dorosav es Elokim hisalech Noach. So Noach made himself walk to walk with Hashem, and so therefore he earns this description as a tzaddik and as a tamim. Vatishachei sa'aretz lifnei Elokim, vatimalei haaretz chamas. But the rest of the earth became corrupt before Hashem, and the world was filled with chamas. And chamas, which I would translate literally as corruption. Rabbi Steinsaltz calls it villainy. It is meant to connote a certain sense of what's going on. But again, it's left to Chazal to fill in all the details of what chamas actually means. And the fact that Chazal give us very detailed answers only serves to highlight further the fact that the Torah doesn't spell this out, right? The more Chazal try to explain to us what chamas means, the more it's apparent that it just doesn't tell us. So what does it mean that Noach walked with Hashem? What does it mean that he's a tzaddik? What does it mean that the earth was filled with Hamas? All of these things are left in very general, broad terms. Okay, I think I've made that point and driven it home enough. Let's move on. Another interesting thing that Hashem mentions that again is not really explained, and I think this will really bring the point home in the most sharp way, is if you look at Pasuk Yirches, just a few psukim later from where we are, Pasuk Yirches, verse 18, 39 in the Steinsaltz, 32 in the Art Scroll. When Hashem tells Noach, I'm gonna destroy the world. I want you to make a teva in Pasuk Yirches. What's the reason for all this? What is going to be the outcome of the mabul of the flood? V'hakimosi es brisi itach. I'm going to establish my covenant with you. And you're going to go into the teva and so on and so forth. What is this bris? What is this covenant? The Torah doesn't tell us. The Torah, Hashem is not referring to any bris that we know about from before. There is no bris. This is the first time the word bris appears in the Torah. What covenant are we talking about? Now you're going to tell me, because you are all wise Torah scholars, you're going to tell me that the bris is the bris that Hashem makes with humanity after the flood, right? With the rainbow and everything, and that may be true, but I would only ask, where was this bris before the flood? Who said anything about a bris? Did the rest of humanity know about this bris, that they could make a choice to reject it? Again, this is something that is left unspecified. It's assumed. It's introduced without much explanation. And even if it refers to the bris that's made after the flood, the question is, why is it introduced here before? Again, without any description. Hashem says, I'm going to establish my bris. I'm going to establish my covenant. What covenant are we talking about? So all of this leads me to the following observation, and that is, and I got the idea first from the Ramban, but I think we can extend it further beyond the Ramban, because the Ramban, like a number of other commentators, identifies Hamas with something which he describes with more of a philosophical term, and he says as follows. He says Hamas, quoting, following Chazal, he says Hamas hu hagezel ve'ha'oshek, right? Gezel is theft, oshek is extortion, and again, there's all sorts of explanations, but that's what Hamas is. And so first he quotes that, he establishes that that's what Hamas means, and then the Ramban says v'nasan l'noach hatam b'Hamas v'lo hizkir hashchasas haderech, right? When Hashem says I'm gonna destroy the world, he says Hamas. He doesn't mention the corruption, the overall corruption. Because Hamas is the one that was most explicit, and this already just caught my attention first, because Pashup Shot, nothing is explicit, and yet the Ramban says, "Oh, Hamas was the one that's mentioned because it's the most obvious, the most public sin, in the context of if you understand that Hamas is the issue, so Hamas is the one that's most publicly apparent in that society at that time." And Chazal tell us that it was because of the Hamas, because of the theft and extortion, that their decree was signed for destruction. The Tam, the Ramban says, the Tam, the explanation for this, mipnei shehu mitzvah muskeles, ein lohem batzorech lenavi mazhir. That because the reason why Hamas is identified is because it is a mitzvah muskeles. What's a mitzvah muskeles? It's an intuitive mitzvah. It's a mitzvah they should have known on their own. It's a mitzvah that is obvious and implicit in the creation. It's what we understand often, we explain often as a mishpat, right? Right? A mishpat is that kind of mitzvah that we would have thought of on our own, even without the Torah. Like, don't steal, right? What we're talking about here, gezel. Don't murder. All of those. I would, some would call them, universal laws, right? Those concepts, those mitzvos that you would find in many different cultures, that almost every culture would subscribe to. Don't steal, don't kill, things like that. So what the Ramban explains is that the reason why Chama, of all the corruption that took place, and again, the Ramban is based off the assumption that it's not just Gezel that's going on. It's not just Hamas. There's lots of terrible things going on that warrant, total annihilation of this generation. But of them, the reason why the Torah highlights Hamas is because that's the one that they did not need a Navi to teach them. They did not need a prophet. They did not need Hashem to tell them explicitly. And so therefore they are punished for that. And the Ramban adds va'od shehura l'shamayim v'labrios, right? It shows it's an affront both to Hashem and to people. The severity of the sin is due to the fact that it's offensive across the board. So excuse me. So once I saw this Ramban, and this idea that this is something that they were expected to know on their own. So then I began to think that the key to understanding the story of the Mabul is the recognition. The reason why so much is left, unspecified, is because we're talking about sin and corruption that need not be specified. Things that are so basic and integral to a society that they did not need to be spelled out. Or perhaps you could say that the creation of the world and the way in which Hashem created the world obviously suggested that these were things that they were supposed to live by. And so Noach is called an ish tzaddik. Noach is called a righteous person because he understood, he was able to look at creation and recognize and intuit what it means to be a tzaddik. That's the greatness of Noach. The greatness of Noach is not that Hashem appeared to him and said to him, "Be a good person." It's that Noach was able to look at the world and understand intuitively and understand those lessons that were implicit in nature, implicit in the world that Hashem created. And that's what it means, I believe, the concept of Hisalech Noach, right? Noach, the conjugation, which I can't get into the technical details because I don't understand the dikduk 100%, but Hisalech he's not halach im. It's not that Noach walked with Hashem. Hisalech, Noach made himself to walk with Hashem. That's what the conjugation suggests. And if that's what it means that Noach made himself to walk with Hashem, that means that Noach quite intentionally understood something. He understood the way the world should operate, the way a person should conduct themselves in the world. And actively chose to live that way, in contrast to the rest of his generation, who could not understand, who could not look at the world that Hashem created and understand the most obvious expectations. And so that's why the Torah does not spell it out very clearly, because that's the idea, the fact that Noach was able to understand without it being spelled out for him. And when I think about the contrasting language from the beginning and end of Parshas Bereshis, it's leading exactly in that direction, right? Here, Hashem creates the world in a way. Hashem creates humanity in a certain way in which it's obvious the way that people should be treating themselves, and 99.9% of humanity didn't understand that. And so when you go from the beginning to the end of Parshas Bereshis, where you go from Tov Ma'od to Rak Ra, it's basically saying that Hashem created the world in which goodness was obvious, right? Just like Hashem saw goodness in the world, we were supposed to be able to see that goodness as well. Humanity is what I mean by we. And yet, Rak Ra is what we ended up with. We were not able to see what the goodness in this world was, and so that's why humanity became so corrupt. And if you think about the turning point, what created that challenge? Of course, I don't think I'm saying any big chiddush here, but it's the eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, right? The tree of knowledge of good and bad. That Hashem created us in such a way, and I don't want to get into this philosophical issue too much, but Hashem created us in such a way in which we would be more inclined towards Tov, but we ate from the tree which gave us a recognition of a more clear recognition of Tov versus Ra, and humanity chose Ra. And because humanity chose Ra, and because humanity chose to ignore the very obvious Tov, they descended into corruption. And against that trend, that downward trend of morality, you have Noach, who is swimming upstream, who's not being swept away by the tide, because Noach was able to see within creation that which nobody else saw. And to me, if you now look at the word bris as it's found in Pasuk Yud Ches, V'hakimosi as brisi itach, even if that bris is referring to the bris that's going to be made later, nevertheless, for Hashem to make reference to something which is not specified is much easier to understand now. Because whatever this covenant is, it's clearly based on the way Hashem created the world, that Noach understood, and Noach was able to live by. Right? It's a similar concept, I think, to and here I'm speculating a little bit, or maybe I'm just using an analogy which is a little bit too far afield. But when political philosophers in the modern period, it talked about the social contract, right? So there's no formal social contract. I mean, you could say the U.S. Constitution is grounded on this social contract, but when philosophers talk about the social contract, they're talking about something that's understood, something that's not necessarily spelled out. It's something that's recognized, that we give up certain rights for a better society, so that we can all get along, right? That's the social contract that is implicit between all of us. So when Hashem created the world, Hashem embedded into creation a certain kind of social contract. It's not the same social contract from political philosophy, but there's a certain contract with the world, right? Who was it? There was a politician who had a contract with America. I forget who it was, but Hashem made an implicit bris, an implicit covenant with the world that Noach was able to see, and nobody else did. Nobody else got it. And so that's why bris goes unspecified, unexplained here, because it's implicit. Just like the prohibition of gezel, right? Just like the prohibition of stealing and other forms of corruption are implicit, so too this bris, this covenant is implicit. There should be, the eating from the Eitz Hadas, one could say, just created a higher, not higher, but it created a greater expectation that we would know the difference between Tov and Ra. it created a greater expectation from humanity that we would understand what Ra is and Tov is, and we should be able to choose Tov because now we have a better understanding of what Ra is. And so because humanity ate from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra and did not utilize that to better understand the contract embedded into creation that Hashem put into creation, that's why Hashem saw fit to punish them so harshly. You know, there's a lot of discussion, especially amongst later scholars of the Torah, people from our generation, but certainly not just our generation, certainly from before also. It's a question of is the Mabul a second creation? Is Hashem recreating the world over again? And there are a number of linguistic clues that they point to that show that what happened in creation is now being redone. That this is the creation of the world version 2. And there's something about that doesn't stick with me. I mean, there's definitely some compelling arguments in favor of it. There's a number of linguistic things that I could point out, but I don't want to go through all of them. I'm just going to mention one, which I find so interesting, and that is that creation begins after light and darkness are created on the second day. Creation begins with the separation of the waters, right? There's the Mayim Me'al Rakia, there's a Mayim Mitachat L'Rakia, and then from those waters, the dry land emerges from the waters. And the Mabul reverses that, right? If in creation the waters are separated, the Mabul, the flood, brings the waters back together. And the dry land has to emerge out of the waters again, following the Mabul, which is just a parallel of how the world was created. There are a number of other things. The concept of Pru Urvu, that at the conclusion of creation, Hashem says to humanity, "You should be fruitful and multiply." The fact that Hashem says the same thing after the Mabul is another potential clue that this is creation all over again. But to me, I don't know. It just doesn't sit with me, and the reason it doesn't sit with me is because Hashem destroys the world on the template of the world, and that a lot of the things that Hashem created in the first version of creation, or the only version in creation, continue to exist. Hashem doesn't recreate humanity. Hashem does not recreate the animal kingdom. Hashem saves them. Hashem remembers them. Hashem puts them in a teva. And so perhaps I'm splitting hairs. Perhaps it's just a matter of semantics, because you could see that as recreating the world out of Noach, out of one person, one family, just like Adam and Chava. But still, it's the fact that Noach understood the creation of the world. He saw the values implicit in creation, the muskalos, the mitzvah muskeles that the Ramban refers to. The fact that Noach got it and therefore becomes the father of humanity means that this is not creation version 2. This is, to me, this is a further refinement of Hashem's creation of the world. Hashem is not recreating the world with Noach. No, Hashem is taking the success of humanity. Most of humanity was not a success, and they were destroyed. But he's taking Noach, who is the success of humanity. He is the tzaddik, and choosing to have him become the father of all humanity. And what's interesting, I think my greatest argument against looking at the Mabul as a second creation of the world is that if you think about it, the core issue doesn't get solved. The core issue does not get solved. What's the core issue? So remember, the core issue, if you look again at the end of Parshas Bereshis, which is page 37 in the Steinsaltz, and page 26 in the Art Scroll, bottom of the page, Pasuk Hey, Vayar Hashem ki rabba ra'as ha'adam ba'aretz, v'chol yetzer machshavos libo. Yetzer machshavos libo. Right? The inclinations of his heart Rak kol hayom, is evil all day, right? That's the core issue. That's the core driving problem with humanity that brings about all of the corruption. Okay? Now, you would think that after the Mabul, that would no longer be a problem, that humanity would learn its lesson. But take a look at Perek Ches, Pasuk Chaf Aleph, 8:21. After following the flood, I'm on page 47 in the Steinsaltz, and in the Art Scroll, I will tell you, page 38. Page 38 at the bottom in the Art Scroll. Page 47 in the Steinsaltz, also towards the bottom, Pasuk Chaf Aleph, verse 21. Vayarach Hashem es reach hanichoach. Right, so Noach builds a mizbeach. He brings offerings to Hashem. Vayarach Hashem es reach hanichoach. V'yomer Hashem el libo. Hashem says to his heart, Lo osif likalel odes ha'adam bavur ha'adam. I'm no longer going to curse the earth because of humanity. Ki yitzer leiv ha'adam ra minu urav. Because the inclinations of the heart of man is ra minu urav. V'lo osif od lahakos es kol chaya kasher asisi. So wait a second. If the whole thing that brought about this flood was yitzer leiv ha'adam rak kol hayom, what have we accomplished? Right? Hashem turns around and makes almost the same observation after the Mabul. What's going on here? It's the same problem. Where's the guarantee that humanity is not going to descend into the same kind of corruption that they did beforehand? Hashem sees that the inclinations of the heart are evil, therefore destroys the world, and turns around and says, I see that the inclinations of the heart are evil. What did we accomplish? Nothing. So some make a linguistic observation and recognize that before the Mabul it was rak ra. It was exclusively evil. And here it's ra min urav. Right? That it's evil, it's wicked, there's a certain bad inclination, min urav, from their youth. And that what has been refined through the Mabul, through the destruction of all those people who are rak ra, is pushing the needle back, not creating perfect automaton robots, right? Noach isn't someone who's just automatically good without any free will, but rather Noach represents a better reset of humanity in the sense that yes, after eating the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, there is a sense of Ra, but it's one that can be matured from. It's one that can be refined. And that's what Noach brings to the world after the Mabul. That those people who had given themselves over completely to their evil inclinations are now replaced by someone who knows how to fight the fight. And so keeping in mind what we've been talking about already, what we talked about before, this idea that Hashem created a world in which many of the expectations or the values are embedded in creation. So embedded within man, within humanity, is this struggle, but this ability to reckon with the struggle. Is this ability to overcome that which is in the hearts of every single person. So I think this idea that after the Mabul you still have Yetzer Leiv Ha'adam Ra, but it's Ra Min Urav, I think is a recognition that this is not creation anew in my mind. I don't agree with those who say that this is creation story number 2, that Hashem recreates the world, because the evil inclination is still there before and after the Mabul. Instead, this is a further stage in the unfolding story of the creation of humanity, in which humanity was created a certain way. Hashem saw it was Tov Ma'od. Then they ate from the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra. The expectations that they would understand on their own the difference between Tov V'Ra became greater. Many of them did not get it. One person, Noach, did. According to Chazal, it wasn't just Noach, there were others. Misushelach was recognized by Chazal as someone who was a righteous person also. But Noach obviously stood out. And it's Noach, it's Noach again, who becomes the father of humanity because he's able to look at creation and recognize. And so not nothing, but there isn't a fundamental change over the course of the Mabul in humanity, right? It's the same Yetzer that was in humanity before the Mabul is there after the Mabul, which to me is not creation version 2, because nothing changed, right? Nature didn't change to whatever extent, right? Hashem didn't create new flora. The fauna was kept in the Teva. It's the same flora and fauna I would imagine before the Mabul and after the Mabul. Maybe there are some ideas in Chazal that argue with that, but certainly Pasha Pshat. And again, humanity is fundamentally the same. It's fundamentally the same. They have the same Yetzer before and after the Mabul. But the one person who got it, the one person who understood, is the one who becomes now the father of humanity, because he's the one who knows how to reckon with the Yetzer. He's the one who knows how on his own, without prophecy, without a Torah, right? Without Ma'amad Har Sinai, without a revelation from God, he is the one who is able to understand what is good and what is bad and how to deal with the Yetzer. And so that's why I believe this is a further stage of creation, not a redo of creation. Just one last observation I would make then, based on this, is that when the world is created, so humanity was a product of creation, right? Hashem created the entire world, and then plop, put down Adam and Eve into the world that Hashem created. If you look at this stage, this further stage of creation as a further stage of creation of the world, so then this time humanity gets a front row seat, right? This further refinement of the world, humanity is witness to that, and I think that's actually a reward, because basically humanity gets to see the consequences of societal decay, of societal corruption, and learn from that. Noach, who understood what was right, also got to see what happens to those who get it wrong on such a grand scale. And so again, if the creation of the world was the first stage, and the Mabul was a further stage of creation or a refinement, what's interesting about this stage is that humanity got a front row seat, right? They were in the Teva, they saw the whole thing play out, right? There was a window. Whether they could actually watch the Mabul or not, I don't know. But in terms of the experience, they were front row to this experience, and to be a witness is to have the ability to learn from that. And so the fact that Noach comes out of the Teva with the same kind of Yetzer, with the same kind of evil inclination in his heart, Minu Urav, is not so troubling, because Noach, was given a master class in what happens to a society when it descends into corruption, when it doesn't learn the lessons that Noach understood on his own. Okay, all right, we're gonna stop here. Thank you all so much for joining. I hope you all have a great day. I'm still in quarantine, as you can see. I'm here in my bedroom, but thank God we're all doing well, and it's great to see you all. And have a great day. Have a great week.